as our guest today, Mr. Ayush Agarwal, who is having a 7 years of experience in oil and gas, both in upstream as well as in downstream. He is currently pursuing his MBA from Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. And topic today is career opportunity in supply chain management for petroleum engineers. Topics to be discussed in elaborated is overview of SCM, career opportunities in supply chain management, as well as oil and gas market trend. And it's pleasure, Ayush sir, to have you on for a weekend for a live webinar. And I welcome you all on behalf of Edvantage India. And over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiraj. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Hi, this is Ayush. If I can have a couple of people with their videos on, it would be really helpful for me to at least gauge that what I'm saying is reaching the other people. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. What's your name, sir? I'm not able to hear you. You're on mute.
My name is Abdul Rashid.
Hi, Atul. Thank you for
I'm a reservoir engineer.
Okay, great. And if I could, just do a quick check and see what other fields people are coming from here. So, what are all the participants students, current students, or Atul, are they working? Have started working? How is my audience like?
Actually, we are having a mix of students as well as oil and gas working professionals. They are from petroleum as well as geologists.
Okay, great. Right. So, So the idea was basically to walk you through a very brief and quick introduction about supply chain management. I don't intend to use a lot of jargon. It's going to be very simple and just the very basics. Because I was, as we were preparing for this session, I was told that a lot of you would be students. So I thought it would be good if we started with a bit of introduction about supply chain management. Now, as Shiraj told me in my introduction, I have nearly 7 years of experience. All of it has been in the supply chain function. In my last role, I was actually managing all the procurement and supply chain activities for the petroleum engineering function at 𝐾𝐻 Oil and Gas, which was a spend of about $80 million. Annual spend. So I do know a fair bit about, directly about the technical aspects of the work, but more so about supply chain, and that's why we're here. So let me just share the screen once, and we can begin. Can you all see the presentation? If someone can just say yes.
Yes, sir, we can see the presentation.
Great, thank you. So the presentation is just to anchor the discussion. There's not really much on it, honestly. So yeah, let's begin. And just a couple of house rules. If anyone has a question, if you want me to repeat myself, if there are any problem with the languages, and even before that, before I begin, am I audible very clearly, or should I, change anything?
It's fine, sir.
Okay, that's good to hear. Okay. So let's start with this. And if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and speak up. And towards the end, once we're done with this, it's not going to be a very long presentation. Once we're done with this, you can please go ahead and ask your questions. All right. So I'll begin with a brief introduction of what supply chain management really is, and this is a sort of a gist as per my perspective on it. Supply chain management is basically about getting the right material and services at the right place, at the right time, at the right cost. Right? So when you are not, you haven't started working yet in your professional jobs, or even in your first couple of years, you would continuously hear people focusing on the right cost part when it comes to supply chain management, but that's not really all it is about. Let's see. And yes, everything that is needed to make it happen. So what do I mean by right material and services? It could be in terms of specifications, quantities, quality of the material, and capabilities when it comes to services. So how good is your service provider? Of course, this is an oversimplification here, but I just, like I said, I wanted to give you a flavor for what supply chain management really is all about. So next we come to the right place, as I mentioned in the first slide. So this is a basic supply chain for a manufacturing firm, not unlike upstream, no, maybe not upstream, but downstream oil and gas organization like a petroleum refinery. I think the supply chain would really work really well in that case as well. So what normally would happen is that the company would procure raw materials and services to be used in the manufacturing processes. Once the material is acquired, it is put in the warehouse for some time. Once they are needed, they are used up in the manufacturing process or whatever the process industry is about. The finished goods and the intermediate goods are then again stored in the warehouse. The goods are then sent to the distributor, down to retailers, and then to customers. So these are the major, players in the supply chain. And the overarching thing is logistics here, because everywhere you see the movement of goods. So the movement part is taken care of. And I haven't specifically shown logistics as another block in the supply chain. It's rather pervasive throughout it. So when I say right place, I mean it could be anywhere in the supply chain. Right place means when you need the material for manufacturing, it is available there. When the distributor needs the material to be supplied to the retailer, the material is there. So that's what I mean by the right place. Of course, you as a supply chain professional would not be responsible for the entire value chain, probably, but just to give you an idea. Then comes the right time. So why is right time important? Of course, if the material does not reach the desired required place at the right time, it hurts revenues, and not just impacts the cost aspect. Now comes the right cost part, which, as I told you, normally it is what is mostly associated with the procurement and supply chain function. But this is not all there is to it. In fact, if the other three things are not met, as in the right material and services, the right place and the right time are not met, then getting a low cost is meaningless. It doesn't really help anyone in the company, in the supply chain, or whatever you want to call it. Right. So yeah, I mean, this is a very, very bird's eye view of the supply chain function as I see it. I haven't really given much for you to work on it, but just to sort of give you a flavor of what things are. So any questions to this point? Did I make a bit of sense, or should I go over something again?
I'm having a question.
Yeah, please
This
tell
is
me.
Abdul Rashid. Actually, the right cost, as you are aware with the petroleum engineering section, the most data is related to downstream part. So at that time, there are a lot of disturbances, like the rig is not available or the facility is not upgraded properly. So how do you manage at that time with the cost?
Sorry, could you come again on the last part?
Means like the facilities is not upgraded, or the rig is not available, or the transportation of the goods from facility to the stock tank is hampered. So at that time, how do you maintain the right cost?
Right. So
you
I
get
mean,
my point?
Yeah, I got your point, but that is exactly what I was trying to impress upon here, that if those things are not met, then even if you do get the right cost for your rig service or whatever. So I am assuming that you mean that the rig is not available. So you are saying that the rig service provider has not provided the rig on time. Is that a fair understanding?
Yes. So because the question comes here, like while taking the right cost, do you consider like 2 vendors or 3 vendors, like a standby we call?
Right. So I mean, that you were asking a very specific question here in terms of procurement policies. I don't really think this is the right forum for this question. I'm happy to discuss this with you.
Okay.
How about we take this at the after this? Once I'm done with the presentation.
Okay. No worries.
Yeah, because I don't think that a lot of students here in the a lot of student participants would actually appreciate what you're asking, because they would not be privy of those those nuances, is what I mean. Is that okay? So
Yes, sir.
I'll move on. Right. So now that we've discussed what the supply chain management is all about, I want to take you through what the major functions within the supply chain, the broader supply chain, broader supply chain management are. So the first is demand planning. So demand planning these functions that I'm listing down are primarily from the point of view of oil and gas. This is not to do with other industries per se. So when you say demand planning, what I mean is, take for example, it's not so much relevant for the upstream or the downstream oil and gas industries per se, but say for example a service organization like Schlumberger, Halliburton, or any other for that matter. They would have demand planners assessing what future needs would be in the Indian oil and gas market, and based on those, based on their assessment or based on their analysis, they would chart out that in the coming year or so we are going to need these many equipment. So this would be primarily the role of a demand planner. Second is inventory management. Now, a lot of times these two would not be very different, but in the same example that I took, so moving ahead, once the demand is sort of, given company-wide, different departments would have their own inventory managers who would, based on those demand forecasts, they would take stock of what material is already in store with them and what is not. So based on the material that is unavailable, they would raise requisitions to procure it. Now, third comes purchasing, and this is sort of the most recognized function within the supply chain management. Purchasing is all about, getting the material, procuring the material. You would have a specialist team in the organization who would, send out tenders, receive bids from the suppliers, and ultimately award contracts. Fourth is warehousing. So as we saw in the value chain in the right place slide, warehousing is all about storing the material till it is needed to be moved either to processing or further downstream to distributors or whatever. So of course, when there are thousands and thousands of different materials that need to be stored in any organization, warehousing becomes a very critical task, wherein you need to have specialists who have the know-how to know and make policies about how a particular material is to be stored, and what sort of policies need to be implemented about the inflow and outflow of the materials. Fifth is transportation, logistics, basically, which helps with the movement of goods and services across the value chain, as we already talked briefly about it. And sixth is contract management. So contract management is essentially, you would normally have service contracts for long periods of time, 3 or 5 years, and you would need dedicated people to manage those contracts and ensure that all the administrative work in terms of management, say for example, issuing letters to the service providers, making payments to the service providers, highlighting any issues and so forth, are taken care of. So these are the major 6 functions within the supply chain management from the perspective of oil and gas industry that I have started out. Does anyone have any questions or comments about any of these? Right, none. So I have a question for you. Everything that we saw till this point, the right place, the right time, and the right costs things, plus the various functions we saw within the supply chain, do you think these are specific to oil and gas function? And I of course know that people who are already working professionals would know this, but this is a question to primarily the students who are still, in their undergrad. What did you grasp from this? Do you think that supply chain management is specific to oil and gas? Anyone, if could, turn on the videos and speak up.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, I don't think so. It's related to oil and gas only. It's applicable to any industry, manufacturing industry. So we can call, and it's viable for any industry, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. And this is kind of one of the central points that I would want to, impress upon you through this entire webinar. That supply chain management is an industry agnostic function. It is pervasive in each and every company that you would hear of. Even service companies need supply chain management to some level. So yes, this is one of the important takeaways from here, that even if you are studying petroleum engineering, or you're studying geology, or any other course or subject for that matter, you will ultimately go in an industry which will have supply chain functions, and you will find yourself your skills useful there. And from there on, since supply chain essentially is something is a cross-pollination skill, as in it can be used elsewhere as well, you can move to other companies and other industries. And this is one of the good functions, in fact, in the oil and gas industry, which allows you to switch industries.
Sir, I have one question, sir. Sir, is there
Yeah.
any specific thing that we have to do to get into supply chain as a fresher point of view, sir?
Right. So are you a student?
Yes, sir. I have completed my degree last year and I am applying for jobs.
Okay, great. Just hold on to that question. I have something in the presentation about it. So we'll come to that. And if that doesn't answer your question, I'm happy to go into more details about it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on. So now I want to talk a bit about the oil and gas trends. Of course, this would not be very new to you folks. You have been, living and breathing it all this while. So I don't think that I would talk a lot of new things on this, but nevertheless, this was something important that I thought that we should cover, even at the risk of repeating ourselves on this. So of course, it's no secret that the oil and gas industry is shrinking. As the global warming and air pollution, the dangers of these things, as they become more and more prominent, the different nations of the world are waking up to this, and they are slowly but surely implementing policies which are going to, in the future, restrict the use of natural resources. Now, of course, that is one aspect, which is the policy aspect, but the second thing is the consumer behavior itself. This generation is becoming more and more conscious about these issues, and they want to live in a cleaner world wherein we are using cleaner energy sources. So the main thing, or the main point that I'm driving here, is that the consumer behavior itself is changing about oil and gas, and they are slowly becoming conscious about these things and want to move away from natural resources and fossil fuel usage. So consequently, definitely there is going to be a reduction in the demand for petroleum products. Now, this is statistic from a McKinsey survey. Now, they are saying that even if the current pace of policy making and the current pace of change stays, it doesn't change, it doesn't lessen or increase, global demand will fall by 5 million barrels per day by 2035. Of course, I don't think that the current pace will, the things will change at the current pace. It is very likely that the pace of change is going to increase as we go forward. And if if they did another modeling in which they say that if the pace of change increases, if policy changes come faster than they are coming right now, global demand will peak in 2025, which may sound scary to you, because in the next 4 years or so, we are saying that the oil and gas demand will peak and then start reducing as early as 2025. But that is a very likely scenario. So what is the takeaway from here? If the oil and gas industry is shrinking, why are we even talking about opportunities? Because there are other things to consider. One thing is that the fall in the global demand is going to be as prevalent in Asian countries as it is going to be in European and North American countries. This 5 million barrels per day fall is primarily in US and European countries. So as far as Asian countries are considered, we are going to likely see an increase, which is a trend that has been going on for a while. We are going to see continuous increase in demand till about 2035. Of course, the main reason is that the infrastructure in Asian countries, a lot of Asian countries, primarily in India, is nowhere near mature enough that we can, wholesale move to electronic vehicles or clean energy sources. There does need to be a lot of investment in this area, and it is going to take some time. So the things are not as bleak as it may sound. And it's not just in case of petroleum products itself. There is an industry usage in terms of chemical productions as well. So I recall talking about one of the industry experts a while ago, and I don't recall the location, but there is a big plant coming up, chemical plant coming up, which essentially uses crude oil to make certain specialty chemicals. So there is going to be demand in the Asian market, that's for sure. It's not going to taper off very soon. So that's one of the points. But another aspect that I want to talk about is pertaining to the supply chain management, is what we discussed was the demand side. Now think about the supply side economics, right? You would know this better than me. As the extraction of oil from unconventional sources became cheaper, there was a sudden flood of supply in the market, which drove down prices. Now that has been going on for a while, and that has made companies think that they need to have their unit economics in place, because if the oil prices come down, only the companies with very strong unit economics, which have operating expenditure in the range of what, $6 or $8 per barrel, they are the only ones that are going to be profitable. But that has been going on for a while. Something else has happened very recently, and you all know it. The COVID pandemic, which essentially changed the demand as well as supply, the supply economics so much that it was unprecedented in this industry. Industry had never seen such a slump in demand as well as such a big disruption in supply earlier. And this is something that has jolted the oil and gas companies to stop working the way they have been working, as in everything is okay, and they have started to think about how they can make their supply chains and their entire organizations more lean. And that is what I'm trying to talk about here. The silver lining in the oil and gas market right now is the focus on making their supply chains lean, resilient, robust, agile, and tech-enabled. I've highlighted tech-enabled because this is something that we're going to talk about a bit more. But the idea here is essentially that it's in a very interesting dichotomy right now, that even though the overarching oil and gas industry is going to be shrinking, the oil and gas market is going to shrink in the near future, that very turmoil that is driving or shrinking the industry is going to open up interesting avenues for supply chain management. Because of the shrinking and because of the turmoil in the oil and gas industry, there is a constant focus on driving down costs and these things that I talked about, making supply chains lean, resilient, robust, and agile. And that is where the supply chain function has their day to shine. Any questions till now before I move to the tech-enabled thing? All right. So, technology, what's the hype? Now, I'm sure what the things that I'm going to list next on this slide are some of the things, some of the terms that you have no doubt would have heard as long as you are, connected to some people or connected to the internet in whatever way. Analytics, blockchain, augmented reality, robotic process automation, autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things. So now these are the new technologies that are up and coming. Some of them are already making deep inroads in various industries. Oil and gas is no exception. Particularly supply chain function is going to see a lot of disruption with these technologies. Are these, do all the technologies here really have substance, or is it all hype? I'm not sure. I don't really know. There are, I'm guessing, a very few experts in the entire world that can actually accurately predict whether or not each and every one of these technologies has substance or has value. But I would rather that all of us be prepared for these. So why I mention this is that the traditional supply chain management function that how it has functioned so far is going to drastically change in the coming years, right? I'm telling you this from example. Companies for core operations roles nowadays ask for people who have tech backgrounds. Can you imagine this? Companies for roles that are operations roles, supply chain roles, they are asking for candidates who have prior tech experience, who have experience working in tech firms, have done coding or whatever. So there is a fundamental shift in the way companies are thinking about supply chains right now, or other functions for that matter. So it is important that all of you make yourselves aware about these technologies, whether or not they find implementation immediately in the immediate future or not. That is not something that you need to worry or think about right now. Whatever you find on the internet, please read about these. You have to, become conversant enough that you know the jargon, that you can speak with experts about these things, understand them, and ultimately, if it so happens that you are a supply chain professional in the future and you get someone to implement these technologies for you in the company, that you are able to talk to those experts and talk to those professionals in their own language. This is something that I wanted to drive home. It's a very important point. It's, the normal purchasing, how it has happened. Their major concepts are going to remain the same, but for any professional who is not privy of these technologies, it's going to become very hard, very fast. So better invest some time in even, and I'm talking about reservoir engineers as well on this webinar right now. Please, or if you haven't already read about these things, please do. Sorry, is there a question?
Actually, I'm having a question related to here the autonomous vehicle. What can be advantages to us for reservoir engineers?
Okay. So, I mean, the very first thing I would tell you is, okay, let me clarify the question. Are you saying, is your question that what would be the advantage of learning about autonomous vehicles for a reservoir engineer? Or what would be the
yes, what exactly it is mean by autonomous vehicles, like for reservoir engineers?
Yeah, so that's what I'm asking. Do you mean you want to learn about it, or do you mean you want to, if you implement it, what is the benefit to you?
Yes. What exactly the autonomous vehicle? What exactly the autonomous vehicles?
By autonomous vehicles, I mean nothing but self-driven vehicles, those that don't require drivers. So there is a clear benefit in terms of driverless vehicles, is that They can drive through the night. Drivers don't have to get fatigued, which means in a given time frame, say for example 24 hours, an autonomous vehicle will be able to travel a larger distance as compared to a driver driven vehicle. Because
So
that would
what
not have to
exactly it
break.
helps with reservoir?
Yeah, so that's what I'm coming at. So first of all, you have to stop thinking about it in terms of reservoir engineering. You have to think about it in terms of the benefit to the organization, right? Because if I'm talking about opportunities in the supply chain management area, you have to think of it in those terms. I mean it in terms of how the entire supply chain in the organization works. So I'm sure that you can see the benefit now when I say this, because if you have certain material that needs to be delivered to your organization for an important job at site, or for, say, for example, something else. I mean, if, say, for example, you are a petroleum refinery and you want to get the finished product that is, motor spirit or diesel or whatever to your distributors or then to retailers, then using autonomous vehicles will ensure that the material reaches faster and safer to those locations.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yes, yes.
Folks, I see that there are some comments on the chat, but I am not checking those right now. Is it okay if we take them at the end, or if it's important, we can, just unmute yourselves and ask the questions? All right, so I'll move on then. Right. So now that I talked about technologies and specifically, thank you for that question. I think this is a very good segue into my next point. You're talking about autonomous vehicles. That means there are no drivers, which means things are moving automatically and don't require human intervention. Now, if that is the level of automation that we are going to see in the future, are essentially the supply chain jobs themselves in danger because of those automations? So I would say no, that's not really the case. I mean, this is not the first time that a new technology is being introduced to the world. We have, all witnessed this right from the beginning of industrialization, the development of steam engines or computers. Once a new technology comes, there are certain jobs that, become obsolete, but that does not mean that new jobs don't open up. You always need people who understand those technologies for the technology to work. And that is essentially the point I'm trying to drive through from this slide, is that you need to educate yourselves about these technologies, whichever function you're in. Because some of the things that I've listed here, blockchain, robotic process automation, Internet of Things is a very manufacturing sort of a thing, but blockchain and robotic process automation and analytics are going to be function agnostic. They are going to find applications in each and everything. If there is a finance person joining this call by any chance, blockchain and analytics is going to be implemented in your function as well. Legal, operations, you name it, it's going to be there. It's only a matter of time before people find applications. So whatever your roles or backgrounds are, you need to, make yourselves educated about these things. Moving on, and this is sort of the answer to the question that was asked, what you need to do specifically. Is there something that you need to do as petroleum engineers or reservoir engineers or geologists to move to the supply chain function? Specifically as freshers, I would say no. There's nothing specific that you need to do. You already have those innate skills, I would say. But let me go through these. First of all, and this is especially true for supply chain functions, finance functions, and within supply chain, especially more true for purchasing. You have to have an impeccable moral compass. Your ethics have to be beyond question. I cannot emphasize this enough, because this so happens to be a function that is always under scrutiny about ethics, whether or not you're making your dealings fair with the vendors and service providers or not. Is there any scope, or is there any chance that sort of corruption may be present in the underlying transactions? So you have to have an impeccable moral compass, because things are not always black and white, right? There are things like, say, gifting policies. Is it okay to accept gifts from service providers, especially on Diwali? If there is a box of sweets, or if this is a packet of chocolate, is it okay to accept those gifts or not? Because if you don't accept, it may sound rude to the other party. It's just a Diwali gift, but there are underlying connotations, there are underlying unsaid expectations, perhaps, maybe, and you need to be very, very, strong-willed and ethical to survive and thrive in supply chain functions, especially procurement. So that is one thing. Sorry. Second is a learning mindset, and that is something I've put here specifically because of the previous slide, that there are going to be new things coming up. And especially in your context as petroleum engineers, this is something that is going to be new for you, right? This is not something that you have trained for the past 4 years in your undergrad. So a learning mindset is important for you to be open to learning something totally different, learning about logistics, how trucking works, how imports and exports work, what are the various methods you can tender things out, and so forth. And the third is critical thinking. Now, critical thinking, by that I just mean, have a basic aptitude about decision making. What sort of decisions you need to take in terms of tendering, and in terms of bid analysis, bid framing, all those things. So I think as long as you have these, there's nothing particularly stopping you from getting into the supply chain function, apart from your company policies, which may or may not, allow you to switch functions or of that sort. As far as freshers are considered, I think, and it may just be my personal opinion, and I would invite you to reach out to other people that in the industry to check this, that the bosses in the supply chain function, and say for example procurement, really want people who understand what they're buying. So in the sense that, if say for example you're buying a specific, say you're buying a ESP pump, so a petroleum engineer who actually has learned about that sort of a thing, that what ESPs are, what is their importance, what are the nuances in terms of different ESPs, versus perhaps is ESP the best application here, or perhaps an SRP pump would work better in this application. Someone who can understand this would make a really good procurement officer. So, and this is particularly with the freshers that I'm talking about. Your education is actually a good, good advantage for you. That as petroleum engineers, you have learned the technical aspects, and you can really do wonders as procurement officers, as supply chain function professionals. So all I mean, specifically, if you're looking for a role change, talk to the senior management, check if if this is something that you want to do. Check if you can make that move. And if you're looking for a job right now, I would say that if you highlight these things properly, that how you make a good procurement officer for that particular company, because of your education in petroleum engineering and other things, I think that would be a good way to go about this. And apart from that, again, I would reiterate, I think I've already said this 5 times now, read about those technologies, because I assure you, your employer will already be aware about these things, and they would be looking in the near future to implement some of those technologies. And if you can give them that confidence that yes, you are comfortable talking about these new things, then that would be something that would distinguish you from perhaps the rest of the applicant pool. So have I answered your question? I'm sorry, I don't recall who asked that question particularly, but if you could unmute and tell me if you want to know anything else.
Yes, sir. I've got your point.
Great. Thank you. Sorry, were you saying something?
Sir, is there any specific company we can approach for supply chain? Like, I don't have any idea for supply chain companies
So,
or
I mean, why would you want to approach specific supply chain organizations at this point? I mean, like I said, you have since you have a background in since you have that education in the oil and gas industry, would it rather not make more sense that you apply to oil and gas companies who are looking for professionals to put in supply chain functions? And it could be any industry, the upstream, midstream, downstream, service companies, anything.
okay.
Okay. Uh,
Yes, sir.
right. So moving on. I mean, this is essentially the content that I wanted to share. Now, conclusion, I just want to leave you with two questions. The first is, are you emotionally attached to the oil and gas industry? Which is basically what I'm trying to sort of, in a joking way, trying to make you to ask yourself is that, are you really looking forward to a fulfilling, fulfilling career, or are you looking for a fulfilling career in the oil and gas industry specifically? So this is something that you need to ask yourself, because as reservoir engineers and petroleum engineers and geologists, if you want to continue down that path, we already discussed that perhaps it may so happen that in a 30-year career, in the later part of your career, you may feel the heat from the shrinking industry. But from an industry agnostic function like supply chain management, the career opportunities in the wider professional market, apart from the oil and gas market, is going to stay open for you. One is that. And the second question is, and this is kind of more important than the first one, I would say, is undergrad your last attempt to upskill yourself? And if the answer to this question is yes, I would say you need to do a lot of rethinking. Your undergrad is not going to suffice. Is not going to work for you in the next 30 years of your career. You need to think about it in terms of continuously upskilling yourself. And that's about it from my side. I'm happy to take more questions now. Okay. I see that there were a lot of things in chat, so perhaps we there.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, what happens if the petroleum industry has declined, and what are the effects to the other industries?
I'm sorry. Could you come again? Perhaps elaborate the question a bit more.
Sir, my question is, if nowadays the petroleum industry is declining day by day?
Right.
So, is there any effects? I mean, some of the to declare there may be chances to decline other industries like mechanical engineering industries, civil engineering industries, like that.
Right. Of course, that's a great question actually. So definitely, I don't think that in today's world there is anything that happens in silos. If an entire industry is facing a downturn, and as big an industry as oil and gas, then definitely other industries as well. And like you rightly mentioned, equipment manufacturers, mechanical, electrical equipment manufacturers, and civil engineering companies, EPCs for that matter, are all going to see that impact because one of their major clients is sort of in the decline. Right. So, but it would be interesting to see, and I don't really have an exact answer for you, because one thing is that, especially in the context of India, the decline is not going to come very fast. So one thing is that, and the second thing is that, yes, it's a very big industry, but again, for these companies that you're saying that, mechanical equipment companies or civil engineering companies, oil and gas is a client to them, right? And one of many clients to them. So it would be interesting to see how much of an impact this brings to them, because as I said earlier, if this is one avenue that is going to close, but I'm I'm hoping and I'm, somewhat sure that something else would open up. So something always opens up to take place of something that is, closing. So yeah, perhaps for a short while we may see that impact, but as things adjust, I think we would be back on track in those terms. And just to add to that, there is a wider macroeconomic play here, that as industries contract, you see a lot of consolidation. So you might see that if the impact of the shrinking oil and gas industry is very large, then you might see that some of the players in the mechanical equipment industry or the civil engineering industry start losing business so much that ultimately they get bought by other bigger companies, and that is something that you might see. Did I answer your question? Sorry, did I answer your question?
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions?
Guys, do you have any questions? Please ask your doubt. Okay.
Hello, Ayush, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please tell me.
Apart from the presentation and the work week, I have a question like, is logistic a part of supply chain, or supply chain is a part of logistic?
Logistics is a part of supply chain. Logistics is one of the parts of supply
chain.
Okay.
So yeah, how logistic and supply chain can be different? Because I'd worked as a chemical engineer, so all these processing are similar to go process, as well as for the reservoir engineer, this is also the most or same. But how logistic can help in this supply chain?
Right. So yeah, I've stopped sharing the presentation, but I don't think we need this. So if you recall the very first slide that I started with, I talked about how supply chain management is essentially a amalgamation of 4 things that I talked about, right? Getting the right material and services at the right place, at the right time, at the right cost. Now, if you think about it, logistics is just one part of it. It helps make it possible. So
okay, so can I consider the route only? The route?
Sorry?
Can I consider the logistic as a route?
As a route?
Yeah, ROUTE route, it's like it's just only the movement. Logistic is just a movement
so
only.
That's what I'm talking about. Logistics specifically refers to the movement of goods. How you manage the movement of goods is essentially logistics. It would contain things like trucking, pipelines, or imports, exports, shipping, air freight. These are the kinds of things, and imports and exports, all those sort of things. This is specifically what logistics would talk about. Supply chain itself is something that pervades through the entire company, from the entire value chain.
Okay, so the question is coming here with like, if you are doing MBA in logistics, because I don't think that MBA in supply chain is happening. It's MBA in logistics will be favorable to do that one?
Okay, and so this is my personal opinion on this question, and please take it with a pinch of salt. I'm not an expert on management studies. And please be sure to validate this with other professionals that you have in your network. I'm not very confident or sure that going for a management degree in specifically logistics is the right thing to do. Management education is a lot about understanding how the gears in an entire company work.
Yes.
Right? How everything moves together, how the business moves, right? finance, supply chain, operations, projects, everything that you think of in terms of what builds a company is something that you get an exposure in management studies. So I don't think you need to specifically think about logistics as a function that you want to specialize in, because and if before I move on, how much work experience do you have as a professional?
More than 10, because actually I was thinking for higher studies. So it is coming like if we have a knowledge of supply chain. So that's what's the main intention I was looking for, that how I can move on with these things continuously.
Right. So an important thing to think about is you will get a knowledge of supply chain in any management study, right? But
Yes.
what sort of a career are you looking after the management study is a good question to ask yourself. Because
I'm not looking for management. I'm looking for skills and knowledge that to be applied with the help of supply chain.
No,
That's
I
the
get that. Okay.
That's one of the
but my answer does not necessarily change. What I'm trying to tell you is that after 10 years of work experience, what you are likely looking at is managing people. You are perhaps not going to be in certain sense doing everything by your own hand. You're going to perhaps going to be leading a team and directing them. Now, when that happens, you don't have to be an expert in that field, is what I mean. When you are talking about management, you don't necessarily have to be an expert in that function to be able to lead a team, because you just need to have.
Can I raise a question here? Yeah. You told me earlier that if you have that Internet of Things in one of the slide, it is below the autonomous vehicle, like Internet of Things, like companies are looking for tech grads also. So if you don't have the knowledge in the supply chain and the job wants to be done and the people are not able to get the things faster, so how like we can experienced person can able to develop the things or get the things done from the people below in the team?
So that is exactly the point I'm trying to make. I would say rather than going for a specific specialization course in logistics, would it not make more sense to go for a course in supply chain management as a whole?
Is it available? Because I haven't seen like MBA in logistic. I know that way because one of my friends have done, but in supply chain, I haven't seen anything in that sort.
But now again, you're talking about management. So earlier you said that you were not talking about management.
Yeah, people have done this MBA. That's what, because I want to be a technical guy. I don't want to be an MBA because I had spent a lot of time. So I have to be stick to that one and do be present with that focus. Then, but how I can implement this management side into my technical aspect to lead a team? That's the main question.
Okay. Perhaps needs a longer conversation that we may not have time for on this call.
Definitely. Just only in small specific, like how supply chain can affect this thing to help out the people in, because being a manager, you should be able to give all the possible results.
I mean, I would have a lot of things to say about it. What we normally think about management or leading a team is not may not entirely be true, because you only see it from one perspective. So there may be some things that surprise you if I go into those details. But the point that I'm trying to make is that even if you want to stay in the technical roles, as you progress in your company, as you take on more and more responsibilities, you're going to be leading people, and you are going to have to move your focus away from the technical aspect to a wider company perspective. Whatever you do, how that helps the organization move forward, how that brings money to the organization. Now, when I say those things, you need to make yourselves privy to a lot more than just those technical things and just supply chain management. In that case, you have to open yourself to a bit of foundation in finance. You have to open yourself up in bit of foundation in supply chain management as well. So that's the point that I was trying to make, that even if you want to continue in a technical role, you are not going to stay where you are, right? You want to have progression for the organization. You want to move up the ladder, right?
Yes.
So if you want to move up the ladder, it cannot be that you are, managing something in silos. As you move up, you have interactions with more and more functions within the organization.
Yes.
So I'm happy to talk more about this to you. Feel free to connect connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can perhaps schedule a time to talk more about this.
Sure, definitely.
So, folks, yeah, if there are no more questions, I think we can call this a day. Anyone from the Edvantage team here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I don't see any more questions on the chat as well. So is it? Did you receive any more questions?
No, sir. So I guess we can wrap the session now.
All right. So should we call it a day?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure.
Thank you, folks. Thank you for listening to me. And like I said, please reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any more questions. I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ayush. Thank you, Ayush.